And welcome into the State of Purple. I'm Aj Mansour. He's Jack Day. We usually don't do this episode, but we're adding in a little bit of another segment here just today because it's been QB's gone wild for the Minnesota Vikings. Real quick, Jack, before we get to that, let's talk about our friends over at SodaStick and sodastick.com. They do bring you the State of Purple podcast. You can get 15% off your order at sodastick.com right now with the promo code KFAN. We're talking Minnesota sports inspired goods. Jack, got some t-shirts rocking. We got, what's that one? We got the Bud Grant on today. There we go. Got the Bud Grant on today. You can head over there, get your Minnesota Vikings, your Minnesota Twins themed, Minnesota sports inspired goods from sodastick.com. And that promo code KFAN will get you 15% off. Jack, we called this special meeting to the table because it's a rainy day here in Minnesota. Practice may or may not happen as the Minnesota Vikings get away to Las Vegas for their first preseason game on Sunday. Some news broke this week, specifically Thursday, as starting quarterback Kirk Cousins left the facilities with an illness. Now, the illness is unknown. We don't know at this moment what it is. People think it could potentially be COVID. They did ask Kevin O'Connell about that, and they said they're going through the protocols. Obviously, that includes getting tested, getting him home, getting him time there. But publicly, we don't know exactly yet if it is or is not COVID. But we do know he's sick, and we know that there's sounds like a pretty good chance he might not make the trip to Las Vegas, which means it's the Kellen Mond and Sean Mannion show against the Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, I think, of course, I say something on Wednesday and say it's been a drama-free camp, and then the next day Kirk gets sick, and it kind of spirals into what we were dealing with last year. But I don't think it's anything to look into too far because, as we talked about on Wednesday, I don't think Kirk Cousins was going to play in this game anyways.
Right.
Having said that, you still want your starting quarterback on the plane. Like I think Kevin O'Connell actually was talking about, he's like, this is as close as we can get to a real game feeling in the preseason because it's a weird Sunday matinee preseason game, which I don't think you see those all too often. So you want Kirk on that flight to Las Vegas. You want him with the team. But at the end of the day, if he's not there, I'm not going to sit here and freak out. We know Kirk he has been a very durable quarterback over the tenure of his career, and I think that's going to continue. And I don't know. I know last year it was this whole crazy thing and the whole quarterbacks room actually got sick, but I think it was going to be the Kellen Mond and Sean Mannion show, regardless of Kirk being sick or not.
And that's not a terrible thing, right? You did mention it. You brought up the drama-free training camp, and then the next day, the Hornets are attacking training camp. Rosen got stung by a bee. Steve Smith got stung by a bee. Kirk Cousins gets sick, and the rest is history. But you're right, Jack. I mean, the situation with Kellen Mond and Sean Mannion, the quote-unquote co-backup quarterbacks on the unofficial depth chart for the Minnesota Vikings heading into week number 1. If you had to guess, they've been splitting reps. They've been going back and forth. It's kind of gone, this way or that way, depending on the day. Don't read into this too much, anybody. But if you had to guess which one starts, let's say Kirk does not make the trip. Do you start that game with Kellen Mond and see what he has, or do you start that game with Sean Mannion, even though they are the co-backups? Which direction do you lean?
If I'm the head coach, I'm going with Kellen Mond. And it goes back to the Green Bay game last year, actually, where it's what's going to be more entertaining, first and foremost. I know it's the preseason, but I just have a feeling that Kellen Mond, I know he hasn't been great. We've seen some flashes throughout camp, like a throw here and there, nothing too crazy. I think for the most part, it's been rather mediocre, but there's still a lot more unknown. I think what the team has in Sean Mannion going into the season. He's a career backup. I don't think he has the athletic traits that a guy like Kellen Mond has. And as a Vikings fan, we haven't really gotten to see this kid play very often. I think people were kind of calling for it in that Green Bay game last year. I know I don't remember how the preseason worked last year because he got COVID too and he missed some time. So it's a exciting factor. It's an exciting position that people want to see anytime you spend, I don't want to say necessarily valuable draft resources on the position. I know it was a third-round pick, which
value, right?
It was I think it was like the 66th overall pick too. So it was like the second pick in the third round. But I think Vikings fans are kind of itching at the bit to see him actually sling the ball around, and I prefer to see him. I know we're probably not going to see the starters, but I'd prefer to see him with the Amir Smith-Marsetts of the world and some of the more skilled guys that have a better chance at actually making the roster.
Well, and I'm interested in seeing how he handles game day sort of stuff, right? I mean, if you are the quote unquote starter, whether it's preseason or regular season, you're still preparing a little differently, right? You have that first drive that's usually scripted, right? You practice this thing, you have it all scripted out, and I want to see how he handles that. I want to see how he handles the second drive that then becomes a little more adaptatious. You adapt what you have seen on the field. I think I made up a word, adaptatious, but you do adapt what you saw from that first drive into that second drive. I want to see how he handles that. I want to see how he handles an aggressive defense. I want to see how he handles a road environment. You come in as the reserve quarterback, and that's all different, right? I mean, you still may have some of those things that factor in. But I think there's just more, like you mentioned, that we don't know about Kellen Mond. We know about Sean Mannion. We know what he does or doesn't bring to the table, and it's not exciting. It isn't exciting. I don't think that anybody is lobbying, maybe outside of Kirk Cousins, is lobbying for Sean Mannion to win that backup quarterback job. Now, Jack, this may be entirely a moot point, right? This may not matter at all, because another thing that dropped yesterday, Kevin Seifert, ESPN, NFL, and Vikings reporter, was joining Dan Barrero yesterday. And he just kind of casually dropped the fact that internally he's hearing that the backup quarterback might not be inside the building right now for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, all that really means is that they're considering other options. What that tells us, though, is that maybe they're not enamored by either of these guys, that they're not impressed by either of these guys. And if their plan is in future drafts to start taking some shots on quarterbacks, maybe we do that a little bit now and get rid of these guys, see who gets cut. The crop of people who get cut. Let me pull it up real quick. It isn't incredibly, impressive. The ones who are available. I mean, you're talking Cam Newton, Mike Glennon, AJ McCarron, Garrett Gilbert. You have some other young players. This is from Will Ragatz, Anthony Gordon, De'Aaron King. Those are the ones that are available now, the ones that might be expected to be cut, that might be interesting. But then you have the ability then also to address this a little differently and potentially trade a late round draft pick, a mid round draft pick for some of these backup quarterbacks. One that Ragatz mentioned was Colt McCoy. Kevin O'Connell has some history with Colt McCoy. There's Taylor Heineke has some history here in Minnesota. Tyler Huntley with the Ravens, excuse me. There are other names out there and other avenues to bring a guy in. But Jack, I'm on board with this, right? Because I don't think that Kellen Mond or Mannion are a plan of the future, whether it be the near future or the long-term future.
Yeah, I'm fully on board. And my whole philosophy throughout the draft process is there's never a bad time to draft a quarterback, in my opinion. I think that's the same thing with roster building. I mean, what you have in Kirk Cousins. He's a durable quarterback that's going to go out there, and knock on wood, I've been doing that a lot so far already on the show. But there's a weird thing with him and Sean Mannion, like you alluded to, with the relationship that the two have. And we kind of talked about it on Wednesday's show, if he would be open to like more of a coaching role rather than an actual roster spot. I don't know if that would ever actually happen, but I think the Vikings could certainly look into trading for a backup quarterback as well. There's some good quarterbacks that are good backups, like the Case Keenums of the world, where if your team, or if Kirk Cousins were to get hurt for an extended period of time, that doesn't necessarily mean the season's over. It might even mean that it might be the most entertaining Viking season in the last 5 or 6 years. You never know. But I'm with you on that one. I don't think, if they're kind of starting to peek their head around and try to figure out what's out there, I don't think that's a great showing for either Kellen Mond or Sean Mannion.
We do have a post up over on our Instagram asking this question. If not Mannion or Mond, who would you want to see as a Minnesota Vikings quarterback? Immediately people go Gardner Minshew. Kyle Sloter, I believe, is available. Kyle Sloter was a fan favorite here in Minnesota. The reality of those two names is probably pretty low, but the idea that they are at least addressing the situation differently than we've seen in the past, I think, is a good thing. If a player is not going to work out, cut bait, don't waste your time. Get that roster spot opened up first off, and then look for another solution. Even if you're bringing in a person for 1 year, but if you know Mond is not the person, if you know Mannion is not the option, then bring somebody else in and see if there is a glimmer of hope, even if it is just as a backup for the future. And then, like you mentioned earlier this week on our podcast, Jack, this loaded quarterback class that comes in, you have opportunities to get a quarterback that could develop into something in the future. You have, Kwesi likes to trade. We've seen that. You can move up, move down, do those things to get somebody in there to fill that spot. But if those guys, the guys that are on roster right now, are not going to be a part of the future plan, and you know that, just take care of it right now. So another thing, Jack, just to look forward to for this weekend's game against the Raiders. Give me quickly, I'm throwing this one at you off the cuff. What else are you looking for? What else are you excited for to see on Sunday's game against the Las Vegas Raiders?
I'm going to answer this with a question for you, actually, and I'm excited to see it live in action, but want to get how you're feeling about the state of the Minnesota Vikings special teams, because there has been a lot of positivity out of TCO that, frankly, I don't think either of us are used to hearing around the kicking battle. But there's not a battle. But Greg Joseph has been lights out from what I've seen. And yesterday he ended practice nailing a 60-yard field goal. What are your thoughts on that? Are you buying into the hype, or is it just because Mike Zimmer's out of the building and that pressure's gone? What are you kind of thinking about that?
I must be buying into it because I honestly haven't thought about it at all. It's probably the combination of there's so many other new things. I'm excited to see what this 3-4 defense looks like. I'm excited to see Za'Darius and Daniil on the field together. And maybe we won't this weekend, but I'm excited to see those things, this new offense. All those things are so much higher on that pecking order for me that I honestly, I've heard the reports of Greg Joseph, and he's doing great, and he looks ripped, and he's doing this and doing that, but I haven't thought about it. And that for a Minnesota sports fan to say they haven't been concerned and haven't thought about special teams, we've come a long way, Jack Day. We've come a long way from what the torture that we've had for the last 10, 15, 20 years and back even further. So that's a good thing in my mind.
I will say one thing that I'm excited for. I don't think we're going to see a lot of the stars play, but I do think we're going to see a lot of these rookies get some valuable time. And one player that was kind of flying around throughout minicamp, I think it was actually Seifert who had him as kind of the dark horse of the offseason. But Brian Asamoah, the 3rd-round rookie linebacker that they drafted, he flies around. I'm hoping practice happens in a couple hours because I'm going to be out there. I want to see it live. But I've read about him, watch his college film. He is fun to watch. He flies around and he hits people hard. He's not the biggest linebacker, which we hear about that and you think Troy Dye and then Shaz Surratt and now another one. But I think it seems like there's a little bit different spark when he hits somebody because he comes downhill fast and he pops you in the mouth. And I love seeing that. I'm excited to just kind of see the rookies as a whole. I don't know who we're going to see when and where, but I would imagine that Lewis Cine would get some playing time. Guys like Andrew Booth, they're going to play, and I'm excited to see how those guys kind of process their first quote-unquote real game in the NFL.
Right. And we will see some of these changes when it comes to the schematic side of things with the backups even. They're still going to do the 3-4 stuff. They're still going to do this aggressive, aerial assault offense, hopefully. We just won't probably see it this weekend with the starting lineup. So excited to have football back this weekend, Jack. Excited to have this podcast back. Excited to have Soda Stick on board as well. If you are getting ready, we have a home preseason game coming up just next week. Still some preseason practices, and you could be decked out in some of these awesome Soda Stick Minnesota sports inspired goods, and we're going to give you 15% off. That promo code right now, KFAN at sodastick.com. Get your Minnesota sports inspired goods for 15% off with that promo code KFAN. Jack Day, have fun at practice today. We will talk to you and everybody else later to see how this weekend's game went. So for Jack Day, I'm Aj Mansour. This is the State of Purple podcast. We'll see you next week.